Welcome to Empowered. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski. In 2023, gender diversity became a hot topic regarding female representation on boards of publicly traded and private companies. Now, according to Osler's 2023 Diversity Disclosure Practices report, nearly 30% of board seats were occupied by women at TSX-listed companies. Now, over the past year, out of 532 positions, a woman was chosen to fill a newly created or vacant board position 45.3% of the time. Today, I'm joined by Deborah Rosati, founder and CEO of Women Get On Board, Inc. Deborah is on a mission to support women in senior leadership roles and get more women on corporate boards. Deborah, welcome to Empowered.
Thank you, Liz. Delighted to be here.
So, full disclosure, I am a member of Women Get On Board, but I want to talk to you about the inspiration behind founding Women Get On Board and the mission it serves.
Well, I really say it got inspired for me in 2015. I'd been serving on corporate boards for 15 years by then in my career. And typically, I was the only woman around the boardroom table. So I would be asked by other women, how did I get on a board? I spoke at women in leadership conferences, and funny enough, I called my slides Women Get On Board. And this goes back to 2009. So I felt I was at a stage in my career where I really wanted to put together a social purpose company with a mission to elevate that next generation of women corporate directors. So my inspiration came from other women inquiring, and I thought it's bigger than a coffee, a glass of wine, a conference. Time to build a community.
And I love that. And I love building communities and being part of them as well. But I want to ask you, why do you believe it's so important that women lead and serve on corporate boards?
I think as women, we have a viewpoint where we have diversity of thought. And there's research out there that says more women on boards bring better decision making around the boardroom table. More women around boards bring more innovation. And by having more women at the top, you're going to be building a pipeline of that next generation of leaders to go into the boardroom. So I think it's collective. I think as women, we have different viewpoints, and I think we have some power skills that we can talk about. So we definitely bring a different perspective, and we can make better decision making. And there's research out to prove that.
So what are the most important abilities and traits that women can have to be effective to be an effective board member on a board, and how can they leverage those strengths?
I like to call them your super skills, your power skills. And I think the first one is collaboration. I think as women, we're very much about collaborating and building relationships with each other to be more effective. And I think the other skill that we bring is we have courage. I think we have courage to ask questions. And it's not so much about being the smartest person in the room, but having the courage to ask the tough questions, but ask them in a way that's respectful and not going to cause confrontation. So I feel with our courage, our collaboration, and another big skill is our self-awareness, which translates to your emotional intelligence. So being really self-aware, how people are communicating, how you're listening. There's a phrase that says, be the last to speak and let others. So you can be really powerful when you let others speak first.
I love the fact that you said the courage to ask questions, because I've been at so many places where people are afraid to put up their hand and ask a question, or afraid because they think it'll be quote unquote stupid, which there are no stupid questions. And I love the fact that you said, have the courage to do this.
Yeah, and I think to have the courage, you have to have confidence, right? And part of Women Get On Board is helping our members to be more effective in the boardroom and having the competencies, but also the courage. And I think the courage comes with knowing that you're not going to be the smartest person, knowing that it may even be a stupid question, but it's asking the questions that maybe others are thinking to ask as well. So there's no stupid question. And I think just having the question to probe, have you ever thought about this? Or, what about this? And really doing it in a way that's not going to let anyone be defensive, but more open.
Hold that thought, Deborah. We'll be right back. Don't go away. Welcome back to Empowered. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski. Today's episode, we're discussing elevating your board effectiveness. Now, Deborah, before we went to break, we were talking about confidence. Now, how should women find their voice in the boardroom? And I know that you refer to the 4 Ps: purpose, presence, passion, and power. So please elaborate.
Yeah, well, I think recognizing that you do have a voice as a woman and you want to bring that forward. A lot of times it's challenging for women to find their voice. So I like to think, especially even if you're the token or the only one in the boardroom, but you have a fiduciary, you have a responsibility to have a voice. You've been selected to be on that board. So to help women elevate their voices in the boardroom, I like to suggest there's 4 Ps. And as you mentioned, there's purpose, there's presence, there's passion, and there's your power. And I'll give a little example for each one. So purpose is really why you're serving on that board. And I like to say, I created a social purpose company, which is Women Get on Board. And our purpose is to get more women on boards. So when you know the purpose of the organization that you're serving on the board, it's going to make you more effective and you're going to find your voice, because you're not finding the voice for yourself. You're finding the voice for the purpose that you're aligned with. So having a really strong purpose of why you're aligned with an organization really helps you find your voice, because it's not for you, it's for others. And that can be really powerful. And then when it's presence, it's really how do you show up, right? And, you can have different techniques. Some people are more introverts and some people are more extroverts. So it doesn't mean you always have to be the first to speak. I think you can be really effective by having presence. And I like to think of boardrooms for boards. There's 3 stages of board meetings. There's before the meeting, there's during the meeting, and there's after the meeting. And you can have presence in all 3 of those phases of a meeting. And it may not be that you're as vocal in the boardroom, but you could be very observant and speak to colleagues after the meeting. So I think that presence for you is how you show up and how you interact with others. And then the 3rd P is your passion. And if you're passionate about what you believe in, it's contagious. So it's really hard not to find your voice. And I give the example of, I was asked to join the board of the National Ballet School Board. I had the financial expertise, I had the governance expertise. And when they did ask me in the interview why I was interested in the National Ballet School, I said, well, because I love dance. I always wanted to be a ballet dancer. And that passion came through loud and clear. And they're like, well, then, can you start tomorrow? So that was an example of my passion. It really came through. It was something I cared about. It's something I believed in. And I had the competencies, the technical competencies and the skills to bring it forward. And then the last one is your power. And your power, I like to look at it as there's 3 elements of your power. There's learning, there's leaning in, and that's the opportunity to lean in on situations you might be in the boardroom. So for instance, a company is going through an acquisition and you as a director, you're serving on a special committee. You might lean in a particular area. I had a chair of a board that asked me to lean in on the due diligence for a transaction. And he said, can you lean in? And I said, okay, I'll lean in. And that gave me power to have influence and impact. It wasn't that I was making the decision at the end, but I could help move that transaction forward from a board perspective. Then there's learning up, and that's your knowledge. And that's always be learning, always be open. And Elizabeth, you talked about being a member of Women Get on Board. We do provide a lot of education and development and programs for our members to lead and serve on corporate boards. So that's your power. And then the last one is sponsoring others, right? And if I have been very fortunate to be sponsored, but I'm also very fortunate to sponsor others. And that power can be very effective.
I love the part of passion. You talked about, you have to be passionate. Every guest that has ever been on this show is full of passion, and their passion always comes through in the interview. We have a short period of time before we go to break, but when we come back, I want you to describe the concept of the power of 3. You talk about the power of 3 in your book, and you talk about the power of three as it relates to women in the boardroom. Do you just want to quickly just go through the power of one? When we come back, we'll continue on.
Well, there is a concept, it's called the power of three. And for in the boardroom, having one woman on a board, sometimes it's just considered the beginning or considered a token. And so when you're one, you need to have more around the table to amplify your voice.
Okay, so now we've ended with one. When we come back, we'll talk about the power of three. Don't go away. Welcome back to Empowered. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski. Today's episode, we're discussing elevating your board effectiveness. Now, before we went to break, we were talking about the concept of the power of three, and you began to explain the power of one. So please, let's continue, Deborah.
Yeah, so following on from the power of one, if you're the only one, it's just a beginning. And then when you amplify or you bring another woman into the boardroom, that actually creates some presence, because then you can say, so let's say, Liz, it's you and I in the boardroom, and we can amplify our voice. We can be advocates for each other. So we can say, you might say something, I might amplify it and say, Liz, that's a great idea. Let me follow on. Or it could be, we've gone around the boardroom table with our male colleagues and you didn't have a chance to speak. I might advocate for you, Liz, and say, hey, Liz, do you have anything else? I mean, mind you, the chair of the board should be doing that, right? So you can amplify, you have more of a presence. And then you get to the power of three, and they say the power of three is a voice in the boardroom. And so you can use examples like amplifying each other, reiterating, congratulations. That was a great point, Liz. Let me add to that, and so when you're the only one, it's kind of hard to amplify your own voice. And I think, so with the power of three, it can be just collectively you're showing up, and not to say you don't have male allies, and you certainly can. And I always have, but I have been in a situation where I've seen more women in the boardroom, and you're a little bit more collaborative, and that style can have more of an influence. But if you're the only voice, it's hard to have the same influence on others. So that power of three can really amplify each other. And the other example of a power of three, and I use it all the time, is if you're being recruited for a board position, and let's say you don't have the capacity, or it's something you're not interested in, you can say, thank you very much. I'm not interested, but I have three other women I'd like to put forward. And I call that the power of three, because now all of a sudden you've lifted up and you've put three other women that might not have been in that pipeline. And so I think the power of three can just be used in so many different ways.
I love it. I love the power of three. I think it's incredible. Now we're going to move on to the 4 C's. So we've gone from the power of three to the 4 C's, which is competency, character, courage, and chemistry, and how they help board members become more emotionally intelligent.
Yeah. So for me, as I was writing this ebook on elevating your board effectiveness, I reflected on my 2 decades of being in the boardroom. And a lot of it came from just observing and listening. And I've been around some of the best and the brightest board members, and who have inspired me to reach higher and bring myself to another level in the boardroom. And they've also been around the boardroom where I've seen that lack of the emotional intelligence, where they just haven't been inspiring. Their social graces haven't been there. And that really inspired me to think, okay, if I'm going to be there, I want to lean in with my emotional intelligence. And what is that emotional intelligence that I can bring? So I came up with 4 C's. There's your competency, there's your character, there's courage, which we talked about already, and there's chemistry. And in competency, which is the first one, there's 2 elements of competency. There's your technical competency. So in my case, my technical competency is I have financial expertise, I have governance expertise, and I'm very entrepreneurial. And I have a lot of other competencies, but that's what I really lean in with. So by having those competencies, it allows me to have that emotional intelligence, because I know where I can lean in and I know where, but I also don't want to come across that I'm Miss Know-it-all, if you know what I mean. Like, oh, she's got the financial expertise, she's going to have an answer to that. But sometimes if you lean back and let others, then you can then sometimes even translate it for them. So it can be really powerful when you have that competency. And then the other aspect of competency beyond technical is your social competency. And that is really your social awareness, having your empathy, being aware if somebody is listening, not talking over others, or maybe not even being engaged in the conversations. And so, you can think of those competencies. And I think as women, that social awareness is so, so important. And I've used it in many occasion in the boardroom, and it's been very effective. And it's helped me elevate my board effectiveness, having the technical competency, but also the social competency.
Okay, this has been an incredible rundown. When we come back, we're going to be talking to Deborah more about, social competency and everything else that goes with it. Welcome back to Empowered. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski. On today's episode, we're discussing elevating your board effectiveness. And I'm joined by Deborah Rosati, founder and CEO of Women Get On Board, Inc. Now, Deborah, before we went to break, you were talking about social competency. And I find that I've heard from a lot of people, with COVID lockdowns, people working from home, people are struggling being social and being empathetic and understanding other people and other people's emotions.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think pre-COVID, post-COVID, during COVID. But I like to think of it, Liz, as your P's and Q's as we grew up in our time, where you had to be polite and be respectful of each other. So I think you need to bring that forward, whether you're in a hybrid model, you're in a virtual model. I know I had a lot of board meetings. In fact, one board I joined during COVID. So never met any of the board members in person, only virtually. My board interview was virtual. And you have to really lean in, and you really have to listen, and you have to be so hyped in following the cues. You've got to have your videos on, you got to lean in, you really got to understand. So you have to work really hard. But I think now, post-COVID and where we are into some normalcy, I think there's a hybrid where there's the social in person, but there's also the virtual element. And I think when it comes to social, I have a couple examples where my social competency really shone through. I had a board colleague that would call me after a board meeting and he'd yell at me. And I know that he wasn't yelling at me personally, but he was very frustrated on a particular situation we were dealing on in that company, with that company. And we were working to try to do this CEO succession. And the CEO really wasn't stepping down. So this other board member was getting so frustrated. And I guess I just gained his trust over time. And instead of making him uncomfortable, I didn't ask him to call me after the board meeting, but he would. And I knew that he wasn't yelling at me. I had a higher purpose. I knew that we needed to make this change. So I would just say to him, Joe, let's say his name was Joe, if we do XYZ, how do you feel about this? And he was like, that would be great. So I just calmed him down and tried to come with a strategy going forward. And to me, that was social competence. It wasn't that I was the smartest person in the room. It wasn't that I could do this change on my own. He just needed some social calmness and collective wisdom together. And it was really, really powerful. But I know that I just had to look at that third part of a board meeting, which was after the board meeting, and how I could have influence. And that social competence of being aware that he was frustrated, as we all were, and he just needed to have his voice. And I just happened to be the person there listening.
So, what actions can companies take to encourage inclusion and diversity in the boardroom and leadership teams?
Well, I like to think of it, it's part of the DNA. You don't want to just say it's in your diversity policy and check a box. And you don't want to say, hey, I've got the token on the boardroom or in the boardroom or on the leadership team. I think it's collective. It's how you show up, because there's one thing to have diversity and there's another thing to have inclusion. But then the component that's key to make it successful is there has to be an element of belonging. So you can have diversity, you can include visible minorities and gender, diversity, but if you don't have the room and the place to have them feel a sense of belonging, then you're really not making it inclusive.
So 10 seconds left. How does Women Get on Board connect, promote, and empower women to corporate boards?
Well, we have 850 members across the country. As you know, you're a member yourself. And we try to do it by amplifying the voices of our members and promoting board opportunities to them, empowering them with programs. We have a mentorship program. We have a chairs forum. We are here to build that next generation of women corporate directors.
Thank you so much, Deborah.
Thank you.
In closing, I'd like to take an excerpt from Deborah's book, Elevating Your Board Effectiveness. In the chapter, Finding Your Boardroom Voice, Deborah says, recently I read about the power of three. One woman in the boardroom is a beginning, two is a presence, and three is a voice. So let's collectively step up and build the pipeline for the next generation of women corporate directors. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski, and I'm here to empower you and make frugality fashionable. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time. Bye for now.